here I am with Sean Stone. This is the son of Oliver Stone, and he is a film producer, director, and recently produced a documentary series, which he'll tell us about in a moment. And we are at Anarchapulco, which is anarchist event in the state of Guerrero in Mexico. So, Sean, can you tell us a little bit about the talk that you just gave?
I don't even know where to begin about the talk. Why don't you tell me what struck you the most in that? Because it was a long talk, obviously, about creation.
Yeah. So to me, what's really interesting is about the power of storytelling and about the nature of consciousness in shaping our political reality, and how the way in which we think about things informs what kind of actions make sense and how we're going to behave politically as social creatures. So do you want to speak a little bit about that in relation to your recent documentary series?
Well, in terms of what we've lived through collectively, in the last few years, has been, to me, it's an elucidation of things that have always been at play, which is to say, a conspiratorial reality that most people are unaware of, because most people operate with the input and the data and the information that's given to them, oftentimes, through the media, which is itself part of that conspiracy. In the sense of, I wrote a book called New World Order, which goes into the story of Henry Kissinger's mentor, and how Kissinger was basically schooled and educated by this guy at Harvard.
What was his name?
His name was William Yandell Elliott. He was professor there for 40 years, had an impact on hundreds of students that came through, but we specifically mentored people like Kissinger and Sam Huntington and people like this. But the point is that the man who mentored him was part of a philosophy, a political philosophy that he had learned as a Rhodes Scholar in England, and basically he had adopted a certain worldview that he then helped Kissinger to understand. Kissinger then goes on and becomes a major architect of American policy. And this is just one professor at the university, but the point is that once you go to that university level, you are amongst the elite, as they consider themselves, right? And you have a certain worldview, you have a certain, you've bought in essentially to the ideology of a system, and you believe that is the way the system must operate. So,
well, it goes to show the power of ideas as well, right? Because the ideas of this professor have, had tremendous, consequences in the world.
Well, the point is that there's a lineage. There's always a lineage to ideas. There's always a lineage to that which is disseminated. So when you go to a university, you're part of a lineage. You're part, you read certain things, you adopt certain belief systems. That's part of a lineage. And then it gets disseminated to the people who, for the most part, most people are not going to elite universities. Most people are not, experiencing things firsthand in their lives. Most people are getting it through information sources that's given to them. And so if it's given from the media perspective, it's already given with a certain narrative bias. It's already given to them, propagated courtesy of oftentimes of CIA instruments, for example. As we know, in the 70s, it was exposed the CIA had bought many journalists over the years, that they were in that very close connection with the students, at the heads of the
with Hollywood,
right?
As well. I mean, going back at least as far as the Second World War, and presumably sooner. And I think that there's now ample evidence for us to know that a lot of Hollywood productions are propaganda, which are made with consulting the Pentagon or whatever intelligence agencies are, like Top Gun, for instance.
Huge Pentagon budget with that. That was my documentary Hollywood DC gets into a lot of this relationship between, as you say, between Washington politics and Hollywood. But then the more recent docuseries, Best Kept Secret, you asked about, that's very much who manipulates your world, how these people are sociopaths, essentially. That
okay, so break it down for me. Who does control Hollywood?
It's not about naming names. It's about the psychopathic nature of people in charge, and how essentially the design of the system is towards controlling humans. It is oftentimes based in abuse, whether it's trauma-based mind control, trauma abuse through physical abuse, sexual abuse, psycho-emotional abuse, all these factors that go into how the system essentially is it's a pyramid structure where you have to basically go to higher and higher levels, and then it gets compartmentalized in such a way that even people that think that they're at the top of one industry don't really know all the behind-the-scenes workings of other industries.
Yeah, well, I think that, these people are addicted to power, and power is a drug for which the appetite of a certain kind of person is basically insatiable. And that what we're seeing right now is, the dirtiest, nastiest thing that, a drug addicted person can do. And I don't know, I hope that we're getting to a point where they're reaching rock bottom and society can be detached from some of these narratives. But one thing that I found very interesting about your talk is that you clearly do not have a materialist perspective. One thing that we talked about was basically how with the discovery of quantum physics in the 1920s, science has proved the existence of magic, but hasn't really realigned itself to accommodate that fact. What I mean by that is that, there's scientific proof that consciousness affects physically manifesting energy. If that's true, then that means that our thoughts have an impact on the world around us, and Hollywood is about stories, and these stories inform our perception of reality and what's possible, what's good, what's important, what's bad, what's forbidden, and so on and so forth. So can you speak a little bit about the power of stories and its relationship to Hollywood?
Well, it's about consciousness, right? So I think when Niels Bohr said it, that if you think you understand, the question is not, that your perspective, that your idea, your theory is crazy. It's the fact that it's not necessarily crazy enough, because once you start to understand quantum physics, it breaks through the entire notion of how absurdity, and it's nothing can be absurd in a world where you have literally subatomic particles bouncing from energy state to energy state, and you can't measure, if you're measuring the speed, you can't measure the location. If you're measuring the location, you can't measure the speed. I mean, there are so many different paradoxes that arise when you actually start getting into this thing about quantum physics and how it connects to consciousness, and then you get experiments that are showing how people's conscious intent can affect things. But the problem is you lose what you're talking about, why science can't follow, because science has a certain they have a certain there's a certain sort of set of approaches in terms of how you can repeat something, and if something can't be exactly repeated, because of the quantum nature of the effect. Let's say if we're starting to deduct consciousness and actually affecting things in such a way that it's not perfectly reproducible, you can't really. That's why science is a problem with it. Same with supernatural things, paranormal things that I've explored personally. My first film, Greystone, was about going into a haunted mental hospital and literally interfacing with things that are difficult. You can't scientifically put your hands on it. You can have an experience of it. You can report certain things, but how do you actually explain it? That's where science is a problem.
Yeah, and another issue with science. I think that basically with the corruption of the science-industrial complex, that science has become corrupted to the point that it's no longer the arbiter of truth.
It never was, though. It's always been an interpretation. But that's the whole point about beliefs and how stories or narratives are built. As I interviewed Deepak Chopra in my Meta-Human documentary, and Chopra's like, there's just different narratives that people have believed in terms of trying to make sense of a reality that essentially, when you're a child, is just infinitely, curious, right? And so when you're a child, you're looking at the world and you don't necessarily have a set belief system. You just look at things and you imagine things and you try things and you play. But then someone comes along, your parent, the elder, whatever, comes along and says, this is the narrative. The narrative is, you name it, God created you for this purpose, or Darwin comes along and says you were a monkey that evolved randomly by chance into this human. So there's all these different stories that have been adopted, but what is actual truth? Yeah, it's only in this moment that we can even start talking about truth. Everything else is just stories, opinions, beliefs, relative facts. But ultimately, the truth is right now.
Yeah, and I think that what we need now is a story, a grand narrative that makes everything make sense, which tells us how we got to the point that we are at now, and what constitutes right action in the in light of what's going on in the world right now. And that's something that I am in touch with various political theorists and journalists and artists from around the world, and this is the big question. This is the great work. How do you weave all of these different strands into the tapestry that gives meaning to what's going on in the world right now?
Yes.
And so this is my question for you. What is that grand narrative?
The grand narrative is the awakening of consciousness to the matrix of control that has been inherited by us for centuries, and finally the human that essentially at different levels was more unconscious is becoming more. The human that was unconscious is slowly becoming more conscious of not only the control but also the multidimensional nature of that control, the multidimensional factors involved in our existence. And I think this is the great story of the coming century, is going to be involving not just metahuman as far as not just interacting with machinery, it's literally metahuman as far as interacting with other dimensions of existence, a greater spiritual awareness, a greater attunement to energy in general. You know, quantum physics, attunement to energy, to understand that this is just an energetic experience. Not a physical experience. That's why we don't come into this world when we're born. Sorry, we come in through this vessel, but we were not born when we were born. Our souls have come in a long time before, and we don't end when we die.
Okay, so do you think that the ultimate truth is, that we are ultimately consciousness experiencing itself, and that there's some sort of evolution going on?
Yes, because the evolution is in physical reality, because there's always evolution in physical reality, just like it's mirrors. The physical reality has to mirror the spiritual realities. They cannot be separate. So as consciousness, as spiritual awareness grows, so physical realities, the ramifications in spiritual and physical reality are evident. So we'll see that in the coming century.
Do you think that there's like an end to the kind of linearity of history that's going to take place, and a resurgence of a more cyclical, nature-based cosmovision?
I do believe that we are beyond that linear sense of time as we've entered the Aquarian age. It's like we've gone beyond time. So now the transition is into a more holistic dynamic, because we become more energy sensitive and energy based, and energy is, being in tune with consequence, for everything from thoughts and the energies that come into our field and what we put out, how we interact with our environment. All these factors become more intuitive and holistic.
Can I ask you a couple questions about your father?
She's dying over there. Poor thing. You said 2 minutes. She's had to hold that phone for 20.
Yes or no?
If it's quick, I don't.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Okay, so I mean, your father was, raised a lot of questions about JFK assassinations, and so you were clearly raised with an understanding that unseen forces direct world events. What was it like growing up, being informed by a perspective which the majority of people do not have, might think is,
I think it's difficult to boil down, how I grew up, because certainly, it affected my worldview, and I think that effect on my worldview has informed everything that I've done, thereafter. Whether it's the interview programs, whether it's the documentaries I've made, the feature film, Greystone, anything that I've worked on, essentially, it began because of an awareness that yes, we are being manipulated by forces, like you said, that are unseen to the general public. So how can I help to bring light to these forces? I try to elucidate things about, the military-industrial complex. I try to elucidate things about the Hollywood, intelligence, nexus with Hollywood. The metahuman, which is more philosophical. Best Kept Secret, the new series, which is more about the overall control structure of the red pill experience. So I think that docu-series will answer maybe some of those questions.
Okay, so do you want to tell our viewers here how they can access your work, and how they can support you?
SeanStone.info, my webpage, is the best place you can find all my work there. The documentaries, books, the movies, all the links should be there. And then if they want to support, I'm on Patreon, where I'm posting new interviews and talks and things like this. And then I'm on social media, like Instagram and Twitter.
Okay, thank you very much, Sean. A pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for holding the camera.
Thank you.